I wanted in the short bit of time we have left, I wanted to ask you about one more unique aspect of TTRPGs, or I think so, which you brought up and you have named, and I thought was really, really cool. So I've heard other people talking about this a bit, but not giving it its own kind of heading in a talk. And so you talk about ancillary gaming.
Yeah, ancillary play. So I was initially talking about metagaming and looking at metagaming, and I'm just at a point where I should be writing something up in this thesis about it. Um, but metagaming, certainly for tabletop role playing games, has become a sort of dirty word. It's the person that has the monster manual on the table next to them. So when the dungeon master says, there's a white, they go, okay, and looks up a white, goes, oh, it's vulnerable to this. Right, let's use that. That's metagaming. And min-maxing characters, designing, rolling up characters again and again and again until you end up with one that's seriously beefy. And so metagaming has sort of assumed a rather it's sort of frowned upon, I think. So I don't want to use the word metagaming. I because it's doctoral study and you get to invent your own stuff, name stuff. I'm going to call this ancillary play. Um, but I imagine your book will be in print before my thesis is finished. So, ancillary play is the idea of the stuff that we do related to the tabletop role playing game that isn't actually the game. So it's moving away from metagaming in that sense, but it can involve everything from like painting miniatures, um, going on forums and talking about character creation, drawing your characters, writing backstories, rolling up characters you'll never use, writing adventures, world building, 3D printing. Um, there is so much I've seen people engaging in this, and I found it such an amazing thing to start thinking about. One member of Group A was a rocker boy in cyberpunk, right? So rocker boys are basically musicians. They're the cyberpunk equivalent of bards, right? And their character was a rocker boy, and he was the lead singer in a band they called Soviet Pillow, that was a erotic communist themed punk band.
It's a great name.
Yeah, Soviet Pillow. So um, the game master, not this player, but the game master and her partner, spent an entire weekend tinkering with AI. And there's this whole thing of AI music, but they were like very, very clear. We hate AI. This isn't for public consumption. It's just for the group. And it was so funny. We'll let them off. They used AI music making tools. They got a free access for that weekend and just absolutely just did it all weekend. They made an entire album of Soviet Pillow. So first they would like put a prompt into AI to like write lyrics to this song, and all of the songs were like, puerile sexual humor, but with a communist theme. So Goblin Gorbachev is the one that I remember the most. Like just and and then once they had the lyrics generated by AI, they fed it into another AI thing that made punk music, American, Green Day style punk music. It was hilarious, and they had an entire album of this stuff to have as a playlist for that session the next week round. That is just the most amazing example, and it was again not for public consumption. It was purely for the group, and it added to the story, it added to the game. And I just remember thinking, wow, that was different. I've seen other groups do character designs, people paying other artists to draw up their characters and stuff. Huge amount of stuff. And then I started thinking, it's not just what we do. Some people like paint and paint minis and stuff like that and have all this stuff, but it's not just what we do. It's also these games are largely played in the imagination. So I started thinking, is part of ancillary play daydreaming? So then I asked my players, how much time do you spend thinking about these games? So many of them were like, oh yeah, all the time. All the time. I find myself daydreaming about characters, about potential adventures, about I'll be off in I'll be at work and I'll just find myself staring into space and plotting out another adventure and stuff like this. And I think that's a really interesting thing that actually, because these games are imaginative, that the ancillary part of ancillary play can literally be just daydreaming about it. And that was a really powerful moment for me because I was like beginning to think, gosh, am I just obsessed with these things? Because I'm a player and also researching it, so it's always on my mind at the moment. Um, but that was a really interesting moment, and so many of my participants, so many of the people I asked were like, "Oh yeah, yeah, I spend hours daydreaming and just thinking about these things. Sometimes I'll write it down, and sometimes I won't." Um, so ancillary play, I think, is quite a nice bit. When I was like, "What's the purpose of this? Why are people doing this ancillary play? What are they getting out of it?" Um, it was Bob Davis, the guy that works for runs Kabouter Games. He is Kabouter Games, and I was chatting to him, and he summed it up so perfectly. He said it's getting back to the table. You're getting back to the table when there isn't a table there. It's the feeling you get when you're at the table, and you can do stuff that gets you back there. Not quite the same, but it's a way to get back there. And if you make some cool stuff, um, the next time you're at the table and you show it to people, ah, yeah, that's sick, great miniature, or oh, that's a brilliant picture and stuff like that. Um, so I think that's a really great way to look at it. So I think in my thesis, certainly there's going to be a section on ancillary play and how I think people do it because it is enjoyable. These games are so enjoyable. It becomes, I think, when you get a good group, and I know there are bad groups. I was lucky enough in my research to only observe three groups that were good and people enjoy, and uh, they're not examples of bad groups where things goes wrong. So I don't have that data, to talk about things going wrong to write about, which is obviously, there are examples of things not going right in gaming groups and things. Um, but yeah, I think when you have a good group, you want to just keep playing. You want it to be that infinite game. And I think ancillary play is sort of feeding into that. I want to get back to the game. I want to get back to playing.
I think it definitely deserves a name, and I'm really
Mhm.
glad you've given it a name. In a sense, it's what DMs have always done when they've been preparing. This is the player's side of ancillary
Yeah,
play,
but
isn't it?
but the play and the players do. Um, I actually, in my thesis, I will have a picture that one of the players in Group A sent to me, and it's an anime style picture, which is into kind of um, manga art, of the group as their characters within um, Cyberpunk Red. But you can tell the players, if that makes sense. It's them, and I've been given permission to use it and stuff. And I think it's just such a beautiful artifact of that kind of ancillary play. Serves no real purpose within the game, but it's just yeah, an artifact, a physical uh, way of remembering that group.
I wonder if there's an element of because you can be more or less guaranteed that the group will see or witness or know about what you have done. That provides an extra element of motivation as well that would not be present, for example, if you're studying two-letter words in Scrabble. Well, okay, maybe to an extent that's a bad idea because that's a bad
No, no,
example
I
because
I
that does.
know what you mean.
But there are plenty of games where you can study things by yourself, and that will never be witnessed. Computer games being a good example, unless you play in groups, obviously. Whereas, yeah, painting miniatures, I remember spending hours doing that, always being terrible at it, but I knew that my miniature was going to be on the table and other people would see it.
Yeah,
So it felt social, even though it was alone. And I wonder if
yeah,
that's something.
yeah.
It relates very much to what you said, your friend Bob Davis said. So yeah, I think it's really interesting. It's a great idea, and I think it deserves a lot more attention going forward. In terms of just trying to understand what TTRPGs have that other games don't.
Mm.
It's so much time that we devote to this kind of, you call it ancillary. It's not really the game. Um,
It's not the game. It's the stuff around the game. And I'm a forever GM, and I know how much planning. Even though I joke, I don't really plan. Of course we do. It might all be in our heads, and we improvise on the fly and stuff. But um, there's a lot of thought that goes into these games, and I think the only reason we do that is because these games are so enjoyable. It's there's a lot of work in and commitment. Your players have to commit to meeting regularly and stuff, and so when you get a good group, my goodness, it's amazing. And I think one of the probably the closing chapter of my thesis is going to be, okay, how can we take this that I've presented here, and like, can we sum it up as, if you're starting up a group and you want to make it a success, what do you have to do? And there'll be things like that. That'll be a nice way to do it.